Welcome back to another episode of Not Sorry here on Juno News. I'm host Alexander Brown. I'm a writer. I'm the director of the National Citizens Coalition, and I'm thrilled to be here and to be speaking to the Juno audience. I've got a great promo code that you're more than welcome to take advantage of. That's junonews.com/notsorry to get 20% off. And I'm thrilled to have on the show this week, expanding on our immigration episode to start the program last week, Michelle Rempel Garner. She's the longtime prominent conservative MP for Calgary Nose Hill and the Shadow Minister of Immigration. Michelle's work on the file has been immense, from op-eds across multiple publications to Twitter posts and articles that have received millions in engagement. She's even producing her own podcasts and reaching a Substack audience only rivaled in size by Canadian independents like here at Juno News and Candace Malcolm. To the credit of Michelle and her efforts as a big blue tent communicator, now is the time for economies of scale on the center and the right when it comes to newsletters, publications, and broadcasting, to do all that we can to prevent the continuation of the last 10 years and to solidify gains back towards common sense and something more familiar. As a writer, campaigner, and communicator who has spent an awful lot of time on the Liberals' broken immigration system and helping communicate the extent of that damage in an effort to better inform the public, hold those who broke it to account, and move the needle on public opinion to get dire changes made, Michelle should be lauded for taking your shared concerns seriously, and we're lucky to have her in that role. If not for black swan bad luck and selective memory amongst the Brantford boomer crowd, this would and should be her file to run with. We make up for that injustice and how unfortunate that is by sharing her work, heeding her warnings, and presenting a united front against excess, abuse, and rampant fraud. I'd encourage you to check out the latest Asylum Crisis Rant episode of her podcast, as well as a discussion on immigration and how conservative parties deal with the loss, with British Tory MP Tom Tugendhat. In particular, and we reference in this interview, I'd like to recommend her excellent personal essay on national identity and integration and how we have to return to the standards of the Harper years. The essay, Michelle's third in a summer op-ed series on non-obvious or uncomfortable problems that should be urgently addressed by the federal government, she strikes the kind of unapologetic, common-sense tone we would all benefit from seeing more of in politics. In the piece, she laments how Canada was a nation where diverse voices coexisted in balance, creating a richer whole. Canada's identity has only recently eroded into a fragmented, ghettoized cacophony amid high immigration, a lack of clear integration standards. This absence of a cohesive national identity makes it impossible for newcomers to integrate into something undefined, attributing this erosion to decades of policies that prioritize differences over shared values. We can lay the blame on the Liberals and the Trudeaus, both of them, but there have been many who helped in that managed decline. As highlighted in the work here recently and in our first episode and a column, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who claims to be a conservative, has certainly played a part there. Despite scenes of temporary and reflexive elbows-up patriotism, post-national policies continue to dismantle our shared Canadian identity in favor of globalism and division. Policies like relaxed citizenship requirements, tolerance of imported conflicts, and the erasure of national symbols have resulted in a fractured nation where liberal boomers lack perspective and accountability, and then youth then lack buy-in, and we even see hate crimes are on a historic rise. Without an urgent and serious reversal or a return to 2014's immigration targets, standards, and integration efforts, I'm of the opinion there's little point of attempting to solve for any of our other issues because Canada won't really exist anymore. We're thrilled to have Michelle Rempel Garner on the show today, and I hope you enjoy the interview. All right, we're thrilled to welcome on Michelle Rempel Garner to the Not Sorry show on Juno News with Alexander Brown. Michelle is the Shadow Minister of Immigration. She's a longtime Conservative MP for the riding of Calgary Nose Hill. She is now, to me, the most important person in Parliament as the Shadow Minister of Immigration, because you have Canada's biggest dumpster fire to hold to account. You have what was once sort of the immigration system that was the envy of the the Western world has fallen into all kinds of disrepair and monkey business over the last few years. It's we're not doing right by our kids. We're not doing right by our grandkids, our present, our workers, our even our newcomers. And so, Michelle, thank you for joining us. And then, immigration to me is now the biggest issue in Canada for a few reasons. Why is it the biggest issue, would you say, like, to you? What about it is why do we need such an urgent fix to this file?
Well, maybe I'll start with what you said to introduce the segment, which is it is a dumpster fire, but it's not because of the people who want to come to Canada, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the consensus for immigration in Canada has broken down. And I think that's such a tragedy. But it's not the fault of people who want to come here. It is squarely the fault of the Liberal government for mismanaging all of the immigration processes, but also for, not aligning immigration levels with the basics that everybody in Canada needs to succeed, newcomers or not, like healthcare, housing, jobs, right? So I think that if we don't restore the integrity of the immigration system, there's so many different things in Canada that will fall apart more than they already are. And, even just from that moral perspective of restoring the consensus for immigration that many Canadians once had that don't any longer, I think that's important too. But certainly right now, there's immediate action that needs to be taken. It doesn't feel like the Liberals understand that. Immigration levels need to come way down. The backlogs that they have for processing asylum claims, for example, like it incents people to abuse the system. So there's so many things. But, the loss of that consensus, it's really a tragedy. And, the Liberals, if they care about this country, if they care about our national identity, then they should be looking to fix that mess very quickly. And, Conservatives, we're here to put pressure on them to do so.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this I think it was over the long weekend. Immigration Canada started putting out tweets being like, hey, please don't commit asylum fraud. And I'm thinking, I don't think we used to have to do that. Like there's bullet points about, please don't take advantage of the system. And in some ways that's actually represents damning with faint praise, but a kind of progress that they're at least announcing, like, please no longer take advantage of this system. But surely when you have to put messages like that out, they are, without fully admitting it, like it is a sign that something has gone seriously awry.
Well, I mean, maybe for your listeners, it's important to walk through what does happen right now, right?
Yeah, please.
So the asylum system, or, bringing people to Canada as refugees, it was designed to provide safety and safe haven to the most persecuted people on the planet. Over 10 years ago, we're recording this pretty near to, I think it's the 11-year anniversary of the Yazidi genocide, right? These are people who ISIS came in and raped their children, killed their women, killed tens of thousands of people, and they were kind of like pushed from their homeland. They're some of the most persecuted people on the planet, and yet it took, a huge effort for the system to recognize them in Canada, right? Now, by contrast, somebody who illegally crosses the border from upstate New York after having reached the safety of the United States of America can make an asylum claim. There's still loopholes in the Safe Third Country Agreement that allow for this. And then it takes years to process their claims. They can appeal these claims, and all the while they're drawing benefits, they're entitled to work. And people, like somebody who has reached the safety of the United States of America is not in the same need of asylum as somebody who just experienced a genocide in another part of the world where their persecutors are still actively pursuing them. So, like, it's just that, like, it's important for people to understand that, like, the system was designed to protect people who are in need, and now it's incenting people to abuse the system. And that's a reality that the Liberals have to just admit right? In order to start fixing the program. So saying like, oh, please don't come and abuse the system. It's like, well, we'll make the system such that it's not abusable.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what they need to do quickly.
Yeah. And we've seen too over the last few years, like the data has been coming in that the asylum system, it's not just the sort of Quebec border crosser. It's the foreign student whose visa is expiring, and all of a sudden, the parents who gave them the dough from the family farm to come over here, evidently now that's an untenable situation they can't go back to, even though they go back for vacation. But now all of a sudden, they're claiming asylum under some attempt at a protected status, and it is just such a outright desecration of the sanctity of the system. And you had a whole asylum rant episode of your podcast about this of late, which it was terrific, and it was an extended rant. It was 40 minutes and thoroughly well earned, and I enjoyed every second. But I think regardless of where one sits on the political spectrum on these matters, like we had such a proud, our reputation in the 80s and 90s was sort of founded on like our role as a peacekeeper, Canada's role as a peacekeeper, which we don't even hear much about anymore. And we wanted to be welcoming to the world and to those who are fleeing conflict and in really difficult situations and dire straits. And now we have diploma mill students and folks who are already in the US and we're about to get the boot, taking advantage of this system. Borrowing from your asylum rant episode, is there a specific action item that you could give the government right now, if you could, to say like, this is an immediate fix for this stream? When the House resumes in September, I want to see this.
Well, I already started doing this before the House rose in June, right? I had the immigration minister in front of the House of Commons, just even asking basic questions like, okay, there are a lot of people, estimates vary between, several 100,000 to several million of people in Canada who are either on expired or about to expire visas. What's the plan to get them to leave?
Yeah.
Right. So there's action item number one.
We're on the honor system.
They need a comprehensive plan to address that issue. Our party leader, Pierre Poilievre, has been out talking about the need to massively curtail immigration levels writ large because we don't have that infrastructure, healthcare, housing, jobs to support the levels of people that are coming into Canada. And that's not fair to anybody, as you said, newcomers alike, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, like, how is it the Liberals have allowed a backlog of, I think it's 300,000 asylum claims to generate, to populate? People shouldn't be waiting 4 or 5 plus years to have their asylum claim looked at. It should be almost instantly, right? There should be decisions made very quickly, instead of this endless delay while people can draw benefits and they might not have a valid claim to begin with.
Yeah.
I could go on and on, like, and we will, like, this is kind of a teaser, but obviously in the fall, I'm here in Ottawa in the middle of the summer. We're preparing, the Conservative Party is preparing a very robust, critical and constructive, litigation of this issue in the fall against the Liberals, because if they can't figure this out, then we will, right? Because it's too important to the country to not get this right. And again, I don't blame somebody for wanting to come to Canada to build a better life. I blame the Liberals for messing up the system so badly that either, people who play by the rules, they can't do that, or people that come here and are abusing the system are getting benefits that shouldn't go to them, right? So the Liberals have to fix this. This is so critical to the country, to maintaining our pluralism, to maintaining our democratic institutions. And it has to happen. And, they've got a really weak minister. The Prime Minister very rarely talks about this issue. And as you said, it's one of the top 2 issues for a lot of people in the country right now.
It is. And I think of, over the long weekend, my wife and I, we went up the Sunshine Coast for a few days. And for those who don't know anything about the geography of British Columbia, a highway doesn't reach there. So you have to take a ferry, even though it's still mainland. And it was kind of like we slipped and hit our heads and we went back to the 1990s, because we were we were looking at all these local positions, and they were staffed by the local kids. Like, they were staffed by 20 somethings and 30 somethings. Like, there hasn't been this sort of temporary foreign worker explosion there. But I know that that's not the case in towns like Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton. We've seen, there's StatsCan data today that I believe Trending Politics put out a post that shows sort of unemployment by province. If you look at Ontario, it's around 7%. Out in Atlantic Canada, it's 10%. And yet, you look at the United States, and yes, we've got some beef with them right now, but it's, you know, it's closer to 4%. And so, I'm in a piece with in the Hub with Matt Spoke, talking about immigration and immigration data in Ontario and how worried we are about these young kids. And how do we? It's one thing to talk about, I suppose, fixing the asylum stream and putting this all back together, but it's how do we get these jobs back to young Canadians and young new Canadians? And because I worry increasingly, and I know you do too, and you put this in your communications and your columns, where it's like, what do we do about these kids? Like, they're already struggling with AI changing everything they knew or expected about their potential job stream, and now we're looking at youth unemployment in areas like Toronto that seems to be tracking around 20%. The CNE applications to the CNE fair in Toronto were like up 300% just over the last 3 years. I think there was over 50,000 job applications. So what the heck do we do in addition in regards to the temporary foreign worker program and trying to make sure that we're respecting employers who have specific needs, but also like launching the Canadian worker and doing right by young Canadians?
Great question. And I think I'll start answering it by reemphasizing a couple of the points that you made, like fact-based.
Yeah.
So we are in a youth unemployment crisis in Canada right now. I mean, both qualitatively, the data shows that, and quantitatively. 1 in 5 students returning to school this fall do not have a job this summer. So we're in a youth jobs crisis. And then, as you mentioned, I wrote a column showing that about how the possible disruptions that AI, as one example, could have for entry-level job prospects, making that a lot worse, even in the very short term, right? So you have the situation where we already have a youth unemployment crisis in Canada. We are virtually alone in developed countries in this. It's not the same in other countries. And then we've got possible extra disruptions to the labor market that are going to make things worse. So why would the government be bringing in temporary low-skilled workers to compete with Canadians for jobs? It's bananas to me, especially in areas of high unemployment. So, you know, how do we fix the program? You have to start with the principle of Canadian jobs should go to Canadians first, right? And I largely don't buy a lot of the lobbying that some of the big users and abusers of low-skilled TFWs make, which is that Canadians don't want to do these jobs, or that, you know, they try to hire Canadians and like there's just no labor. I just don't believe that. I do believe that the use and abuse of the TFW program over the last decade under Liberal policies has allowed abusers of the TFW program to distort wages writ large in the country, and actually I think suppress wage growth in certain areas. You know, we also have the principle of labor mobility in the country, right? I also don't buy that like that people don't want to move across the country from areas of high unemployment to other areas. We should be looking, what the government should be doing is saying, like, how do we partner with everybody to help employ people who are here, especially in areas of the country where there may be, you know, regionally rare low unemployment. There are a need for like a perennial need for seasonal agricultural workers. These are difficult to fill jobs. In any scenario, they're seasonal because of their seasonal nature. So there's probably a need to carve off that component of this, but like big time reductions in other areas. And again, like I encourage people to look at the data. There's several sites that post all of the TFWs, the labor market impact assessments that were granted in people's regions. They can see the types of jobs that employers are getting, like basic administrative assistants,
Yeah.
Hospitality workers in major urban centers. Like these are positions that should be filled by Canadians.
Yeah.
And the government is making it way too easy for the abuse of this program and for Canadian youth to lose opportunities for jobs. And it's got to change massively and quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me increasingly talking to those who try to defend some of what's happened, that whether it's seemingly an outright lie or a kind of cope when they talk about labor shortage, and you get these kids don't want to work. And then you go, well, then why were there 54,000 job applications to the CNE?
Exactly.
Why how come, I interface with these young Canadians a lot in my work. And it's, when I talk to a guy in their 20s who tells me he's, handed out 200 resumes and gone absolutely nowhere, that's not just anecdotal. It's because there's thousands of him, because it's an evergreen experience. And so, I understand that maybe some of these companies are not acting in bad faith, but in some ways, the federal government has opened up the fire hose to sort of cheap, lower skilled labor that really undercuts these kids and sets them up for failure and a kind of replacement in the labor force. How do we also, after sort of giving them an inch and them taking a mile, is it even possible to wean these companies, some of these corporations, off of this new sort of underclass?
It absolutely is, because it's been done before.
Yeah.
Former Alberta Premier, but then he was the minister in charge of this program, Jason Kenney, under the former Conservative government, made substantive changes to the temporary foreign worker program. I was in the government at that point in time, and I remember the kicking and screaming from, I won't name the exact names, but, chain restaurants coming and saying, well, I can't, how am I going to open this up? And it's like, well, how did you not price this into your business model? How did you not think about labor? And why aren't you making more of an effort to hire Canadians? So Jason Kenney, he did make those changes. All the Liberals had to do was, we had taken the political heat for doing this. There was already an adjustment. It was a phased in process, right? The phasing in was happening, that weaning off process, if you will. And the Liberals reversed all of it. They reversed all of it and went way further, right? When you look across other areas of foreign labor streams, like the issuance of foreign student visas, for example, who are allowed to work when they're in Canada. So all the Liberals had to do was just not reverse the changes.
Yeah.
The changes have been made, right? But they were, I think that there was a certain amount of capture from lobbies that were like, well, of course, no Canadian wants to do this work. And it's like, I don't buy it. I don't buy it, because I know, and Alex, we know people who are hopeless, young Canadians who are hopeless about finding a prospect of work and building a life for them in Canada.
Yeah.
In Canada.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to anybody. So, pardon me for doing my job and wanting to advocate for people who can't find work because of a government program that is distorting wages and removing opportunity from them. That's not right. It's not right. And somebody has to be standing up for these workers. And apparently that's not the Liberals right now. It's mind-boggling.
No, and I worry about the language they've used recently, Lena Diab, before going away for the summer. And we've been seeing a lot of you this summer. We haven't been seeing a lot of her, which is, slightly, alarming.
She's remarkably incompetent.
Well, that's...
I kind of understand why they don't want to put her out. She was woefully unprepared for basic debate in the House of Commons. She doesn't know her file. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what I was going to ask her in the first session of Parliament. It's literally in the newspaper every day, and she couldn't. So anyway, sorry, that was my therapeutic rant. I'm shocked they put such a weak minister in that position, given how important it is.
Yeah, because I'm going to butcher his name, so I'm just going to call him Gary A. Well, when it came to the public safety minister too, it's he's in charge of gun legislation. He doesn't know what an RPAL is. He has to abstain from certain files because he has Tamil Tiger associations. And you're going, I thought you guys were supposed to be serious. I thought you were supposed to be different. This looks a whole lot like the last 10 years.
I just don't think Carney cares about these files,
Yeah.
Alex. Like, and I really don't think that he has the chops and understanding on how, like, I'll use the term social policy, if you will, like immigration, justice, how, the woke policies of his predecessor and most of his cabinet of the last 10 years has created all of these structural problems in the country that they have to get on top of. So, putting, like, I think Lena is the 7th or 8th immigration minister in 10 years.
It's been a real rogues gallery of
he needed to have one of his strongest players and somebody who can lean into the bureaucracy and across, these industries that have sprung up around, temporary foreign labor and advocacy for, abuse of the system, essentially. He needed to have somebody who was like, no, not today, not with what's at stake for the country. We are going to make some changes. And, to me, it like being kind of a pundit, it to me shows me that he really doesn't care about the file to put somebody as weak as her there.
Yeah, I worry about those political instincts, which it can be nice to have an outsider, but we also know that he's not truly an outsider. But quite early on, you see an obliviousness with the public. You see a lack of interest on meaningful files. You have, after Sean Fraser and Mark Miller, to not turn around and go here's a heavy hitter who is going to cut down an entire racket at this point, like a fraud network. You see some of these schools and go you're not even trying. I've talked to teachers at some of these schools, and they sat down for a week and tried to teach, and then were this is just, they're not even attempting to make this look real. I quit. And so you needed somebody there, right, to crack down on that.
Yeah, and I should say, as much as I just, ranted about her, I hope she succeeds. She has to succeed,
yeah, no
right?
Kidding. Yeah.
She has to succeed in reforming the system.
Yeah.
There's a lot that needs to be done for all the reasons that we've already talked about. But there needs to be critical and immediate reforms to the system. Levels need to come way down. They need to be tying levels to things like healthcare. They need to be factoring in technological change like AI to the amount of temporary permits that they're issuing to the country, and that takes political will, and it takes a heart for the people of Canada, a heart for the newcomers of Canada, and to just look across all the the BS and say, no, we're doing what's right by this country. And what's right by this country right now is not allowing the status quo to fester. So I hope my job as an opposition critic will be to mercilessly and relentlessly prosecute the failings of the government on this file and offer solutions, right, where appropriate, and advocate for them. But what she should be doing, if she's a smart cabinet minister, is being she's giving me space within cabinet to push for reforms, right? She was an immigration minister, not a great one, in a provincial government for 10 years. She had a lot of controversy and scandal, but she should, in theory, be able to hit the ground running.
Yeah.
We can only pray that there's some positive movement there.
Yeah, and so it kind of falls to you to expand that social license for them, and then on folks like me, on an audience like this. And so going into the fall, going into how important and crazy this all is, and this dire need for change, what's an action item for this audience? Because we all feel frustrated, I think, about the results of the federal election, but this gets worse in a vacuum if we all just collapse in the street and go, nothing's going to change. How do we sort of embolden people? How do we keep the momentum and continue that growth that you see in the numbers for the election on the conservative side? I don't want to just go away from talks like this, and I'm lucky to get to talk to you and just say we'll see. It's how can I better inform this audience? How can we lead them to really forcing change, and how do we make the Liberals listen?
It's a great question, and I would start with this principle. Don't let the Liberals off the hook for this, right? Yeah. Often when we talk about immigration, when people talk about immigration, they talk about the symptoms, and it can be construed as the fault of somebody who wants to come to Canada to make a better life for themselves, right? Nobody should be faulted for wanting what our country, in theory, should promise to the world. I would tell your listeners to put the blame for the loss of acceptance of immigration and the extremely high levels of immigration without the support of housing, healthcare, and jobs the blame has to go to the Liberal government. I don't want to be sitting in the House of Commons litigating, having Liberals be like, well, with proof points, this is, X, Y, and Z don't actually want immigration. We don't need blah, blah, blah. It's like
the kids don't want to work.
You messed up the system.
Yeah.
And to make it work, and it goes beyond, and I guess the second part of my ask to your audience would be, there's I see a lot of talk online about multiculturalism, right? And does multiculturalism work? Was it a bad policy? Was it a good policy? But all of that discussion kind of misses the point, because multiculturalism can't function if we don't have strong democratic institutions like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, a strong judiciary that puts criminals behind bars, that enforces a shared rule of law, right? That keeps foreign interference out of our election processes. Multiculturalism can't function without those things.
Yeah.
And it's been the Liberals that have destroyed those institutions on purpose, right? With like a post-national vibe to it. So when people are talking, the second thing I would say is when you're talking about multiculturalism in Canada, talk about how the Liberals, by eroding the justice system, eroding freedom of speech, and allowing more censorship, making it difficult for certain groups of people in this country to practice their faith, and so on and so forth. That is what makes multiculturalism impossible in a country, right? So in order to fix that beauty that we had 10 years ago, this was not an issue under Stephen Harper and the Conservative government. Immigration was not cracking the top 10 as an issue. And why?
Yeah.
It's because the system worked, right? But we also had a national identity. Instead of, the Justin Trudeau woke, there is no national identity to this country. We don't have, Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of National Identity now, is like, well, there's no one way to be Canadian. He couldn't articulate anything about those democratic institutions needing to be there. That's what needs to change. So, if we have the public talking about those two issues in a constructive way and putting the blame back on the Liberal government and asking for change, then change will happen, right? Then my job becomes easier. Then it's just not like a heavy lift for awareness.
Yeah.
It's, being able to get policy through.
Okay. And so it falls on us then, me and the listeners, to answer that call, because I would also encourage folks to read. Michelle has a terrific piece on her Twitter right now about integration and what's lacking there, where it's like that, there's a lack of connective tissue now and identity and what that all means, and how we can't just be balkanized and different. We've got to come together. And so, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. These have been terrific points. I've learned a lot. I hope the audience has too. And, thanks so much for your important work right now.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for talking about this issue.
Thank you for joining us here at Juno News and this interview with Michelle Rempel Garner. For more from Juno and to support vital independent journalism on issues like immigration and fixing Canada after all that's been broken, take advantage of my promo code. It should be right below. That's junonews.com/notsorry. I've been Alexander Brown. For more from me, you're welcome to follow me on Twitter at AlexBrown17. You can find my work at the National Citizens Coalition at nationalcitizens.ca, or you can find more of my writing on Substack at acceptableviews.substack.com. Thanks for being here.